Thank you very much. Thanks to the organisers for inviting me. In German they say, "Den letzten beißen die Hunde, the last one gets bitten by the dogs." So this is probably going to happen to me as well. Not only by speaking last, I'm also going to repeat a little bit of what has been said by the other speakers. I'll try and cut that down a bit. My sort of guiding question is, what sort of economic governance should we have in the euro area and in the European Union to contribute to realising a good society, which I think is the overall topic of this conference. I have 7 points to that. Start out by setting out a normative vision, a little bit like the way you finished your presentation, Karen. Then looking at the problems we have in the euro area, the reasons for those problems, notably the inadequate architecture, institutional architecture. Reflect a little bit on the crisis, and then spend a bit more time on some alternative proposals. So the normative starting point, I think, for the from a sort of good society perspective, a little bit similar to what Will said yesterday. I think we need economic growth. We need economic growth. There's of a specific nature, though. It should be balanced between countries. It should be balanced socially. So those would be in terms of the income distribution, the spread of the benefits of economic growth across society. It should be sustained, not sustainable. That's the next point. It should be sustained. It shouldn't be subject to repeated crises, and it should be sustainable ecologically. So I would insist, indeed. I mean, this issue of full employment came up in the last session. I would insist on that from a social democratic or a good society perspective. We can discuss a little bit the details of what that exactly might mean. And there was some pessimism expressed in the last session. I mean, actually, some small European countries prior to the crisis actually had achieved something like full employment. So I wouldn't be necessarily so pessimistic on that. I mean, I do think that some concept of full employment is also a prerequisite for us achieving other goals, notably job quality, because it puts workers in a stronger position vis-a-vis employers in terms of demanding certain, also more quantitative aspects to their work. So the problem is, of course, that what we've had in the euro area over a longer period, but also not particularly in the crisis, is that our economic growth has been imbalanced between countries. We've had a situation where initially the so-called peripheral economies of the euro area enjoyed strong growth. We heard more about Ireland, the case of Ireland yesterday. But similar considerations apply also to Spain and Greece and other places. And Germany and some of the core economies were very sluggish. Now it seems we're having the opposite, right? We're going to have a concentration now on economic activity, growth economic activity in the core economies, and the peripheral economies are really in a rather dreadful state. Second problem, we had unbalanced growth in terms of social outcomes, with to some extent quite extreme increases in inequality, notably in Germany, although some countries like France seem to manage to have avoided this. It's obviously not being sustained because we've just all been hit more or less severely by the crisis, and we're all agreed along the lines of the discussion we had yesterday that the growth model is not sustainable in ecological terms. And I think there are reasons for that. I mean, economic governance isn't everything. I'm just going to focus on that. Of course, there are other issues playing a role, but I do think that I am convinced that economic governance and the architecture we have, the way we run policies at the more macro level is of vital importance for achieving these goals. Now, as was to some extent already said by the other speakers, essentially the economic governance architecture was established in the mid-90s. This was at the high point of neoliberalism. It was unemployment was very high. There was this debate about eurosclerosis. Many of you will remember this period probably with something of a shudder. But this was the time when essentially the basic building blocks were put in place. And that the ideology that underpinned that had certain specific features. Again, partly we discussed here, about the efficiency of markets, the need for liberalisation to make institutions approximate to the way markets work. Issues about the role of money in the economy. That money is a very classic sort of conception of money as a veil to real values. Belief in rational expectations. All these sorts of things. That was the underpinning ideology for an architecture which was based not on policy coordination, but on policy assignment. And often we talk about the Maastricht policy assignment. Again, I can run through it very quickly. It's been touched on by other speakers. You accord responsibility for monetary policy to an independent central bank. You give that central bank a single target, which is to maintain price stability. You conceive of fiscal policy primarily as a problem of ensuring fiscal consolidation and minimizing state activity in the economy. So there are coordination issues there. So you set up a Stability and Growth Pact, which constrains governments in spending more than 3% of GDP, and then you also implement longer-term rules for them to maintain budgetary positions close to balance or in surplus over the long term. As part of that, notably we have this clause, of course, in the Maastricht Treaty that there's no provision for a bailout between member states which are confirmed. And the final element, which is often left out, but I was happy that the Parliament also picked it up, is the emphasis on structural reforms. And I think that the point needs to be made a lot more explicit, that the role of structural reforms in this conception, and particularly the role of wage setting, is that this is what generates full employment. Right? It's not macroeconomic policy that generates full employment. It is structural reforms. And simplifying somewhat, the more structural reforms you have, and the more liberal your economy is, the more closer it approximates to a sort of textbook market. Different areas, and particularly on the labour market, the higher your employment, you'll see. That was the basic setup. Probably familiar to most of you, but I think it's worth setting that out in slightly more sort of formalised terms. Now, as I've said just before that, we know that didn't work very well. Even prior to the crisis, a very mixed performance, growth terms, employment terms. Again, mixed across countries, etc., etc. But of course, the real shock then came with the crisis. So it's important to reflect a little bit on that. I mean, I think the first point to make is that, and this shouldn't be forgotten. I mean, initially, I think the euro area was seen as or the euro was seen as a bulwark against the crisis. Right? I mean, a lot of countries were worried about sort of disorderly exchange rate adjustments, and the euro area seemed to offer some protection from that. And certainly, I do think that in the absence of the euro, we would have had big changes in exchange rates also between the member countries, which would have added additional turbulence and additional added to the economic pressures on countries. Having said that, it's now become fairly clear, or soon afterwards became fairly clear, that there's a high price to be paid for that in terms of the loss of monetary autonomy once you're a member of the euro area. Your inability to devaluate your currency, if you compare, for example, the situation of Ireland and the situation of the UK, both in many similarities in terms of housing boom and migration and credit growth and things. And the key difference, I think, between the two countries, but the key difference, I would argue, is indeed this lack of monetary autonomy in the case of Ireland, which is why now we see the IMF walking through the streets of Dublin and, according to the cover picture on the Financial Times, walking past the beggar in the street with holding out his cup, hoping for a couple of euros. So that's obviously a serious problem, and it gives rise to the demands, of course, that Henry mentioned before, for European level measures. If countries don't have the monetary autonomy to get out of the crisis by themselves, then they need the European level measures. Some progress has been made there. I think. Let me turn to that now. Because I mentioned it, we have seen some re-regulation in the financial markets. Because could it's a bit faster. We have seen the establishment of the financial stability facility and the support from the ECB. The no bailout clause in the Maastricht Treaty is essentially circumvented, but let's use a polite word. Some changes, faced with the crisis have been made there, and what has now come out over the summer have been a series of proposals to reform economic governance by essentially a sort of tandem process of the European Commission on the one hand and the task force under the Council and the Van Rompuy on the other, but essentially going in a similar direction. And it's basically a three-pronged approach. The first is to tighten fiscal surveillance, to tighten up the Stability and Growth Pact. The second is to focus more on these macroeconomic imbalances, and the third is to have a European semester to coordinate the process of economic policy making more clearly. I have a column on this on the Social Europe Journal website. If you'd like to, read a sort of more detailed analysis of that. I mean, I think essentially the tightening of the Stability Pact is a huge mistake. The focus on imbalances is sort of a good thing, but not the way they want to do it. And the introduction of the European semester is essentially a good idea. But you'll get a more nuanced analysis if you have a look at that column. So let me conclude then by setting out, some sort of agenda which I think could move us towards an economic governance architecture or system that would contribute to realising the goals that I set out at the start, and I would hope would garner support from progressive forces across Europe. Let me try and run through them fairly quickly. The first one would be to change the mandate of the European Central Bank, to broaden that mandate away from the focus on price stability, to add employment and financial stability to that mandate. That would imply a need for additional tools for the bank. Of course, you can't achieve multiple policy goals just with a single tool, as we know from economic theory. And there are various proposals out there which I won't go into now. We need to have some mechanism that enables the central bank in a more formalised and less ad hoc and discretionary way to back up governments in facing problems with sovereign debt. The second point is financial market regulation. I won't talk about it anymore. I think we have made some progress there. We need to make some further progress, a little bit to some extent along the lines that Christian Kellerman also talked about. We need a permanent bailout and debt resolution mechanism. I think that's a view broadly shared actually now, also outside of the mainstream left. I think also conservative politicians have realised that is what is needed. Fourthly, we need greater coordination of national policies. There's a lot of sub-points here. I'll go through them quickly. I think the key lesson is that macroeconomic imbalances between euro area countries really matter, and that we must primarily focus on resolving those. And my proposal is actually to put that at the centre of policy coordination and have fiscal policy coordination as a sort of subset of that, rather than the other way around, which is the case at the moment, where we focus on fiscal policy coordination. And there's an implication of that, talking about macroeconomic imbalances. That's related to the way that these different sectoral imbalances in the economy add up. National accounting communities, I won't go into that now. We should try and strengthen the automatic stabilizers that we have in our economies. A nice implication of that for the mainstream left is that making tax systems more progressive is a good way to do that. Expanding the welfare state is a good way to do that. But there are other elements that could be introduced to raise the automatic stabilization capacity of our economies. We shouldn't forget that this has actually been systematically weakened by neoliberal policies over the last 20 years. We need greater coordination of wage setting. I think it's a very fundamental point. Again, it's related to this issue of imbalances. I mean, I could talk for a long time about this issue. The imbalances arose because the core economies, Germany and those around it, were engaged in a policy of wage moderation, essentially improving their competitiveness. The peripheral economies were on another track, having had their interest rates reduced quite considerably by joining the euro area. Again, Paul Clancy referred to this in the case of Ireland yesterday. We need to have coordination mechanisms that enable wages to grow in line with productivity and some allowance for inflation across the whole euro area, so to avoid the creation of these imbalances. We need, I'm running out of time, two last points. We need a greater role for public investment in our economies. I very much take the point that Henning was insisting on before, especially in the current environment of using this cheap money to invest in our society. But I think we need to raise the level of public investment generally, across the cycle. That's not a cyclical issue, actually, that's a more fundamental issue about having a public investment-led recovery, also for sustainability reasons. And as various colleagues around the table, around the big table have insisted, we need floors in labour markets. We don't need at the European level interfering, in my view, with intricacies of active labour market policy. I don't think that's the way forward. But we need agreement on certain basic minimum standards, a minimum wage norm. I would argue for 50% of the average wage in each country. I mean, this is the sort of package of measures that I think we can be discussing. We can try and, where we're already quite concrete, we can try and make the case for them in the coming years. Let me just conclude. I'm less pessimistic on political situation, some of the colleagues especially were yesterday, I think we're seeing one of the advantages of having the right in power all across Europe is that they're going to mess up. Right? They're going to mess up. And I think in a number of countries they're going to get kicked out. And I think one of the great things about this conference and the sort of work that lots of people around the table are doing is to be prepared for that. Be prepared for that moment where we can come in with our progressive and alternative proposals for a better future for European citizens. Thank you very much. Sorry.